Things moving smooth. So first off, I want to do a reality check because we don't have enough reality these days. I'm a security consultant. You can holler at me at Packet Brigade. Feel free to call BS or interrupt me anytime. There's a lot of people who've done some really amazing election security work and know a lot more than I do, but I wanted to share with you what I've seen with my own eyes right here in our backyard. I worked with one county. One county doesn't mean all 88 counties or however many counties we have in the state, but I worked with one county. And can anybody tell me why I worked with the county for elections?
Because you work for the county.
Yeah, the second gentleman, because the county administers the elections. A good call. So I put a little icon where it's something I've seen. I put a little book icon if I'm citing a source. Everything else is opinion, standard disclaimer. This doesn't affect my, reflect on my clients, the officials I've talked to, so on and so forth, the employer. I'm trying to be nonpartisan and apolitical, except where InfoSec is concerned. But you guys feel free to call me out on that if there's anything you think is political in this talk. It's obviously a lot easier to criticize than to create, right? And we're going to see a lot of stuff in here that's going to be a total InfoSec facepalm. But I just want to give a shout out to the elections officials who have protected the elections for the last couple hundred years in our country from all kinds of crazy threats before threat modeling was even a thing. So as we go through this and see how bad things really are, we can at least say props to those election officials. Okay, I want to talk about this. This is opinion, but in my work, these are some prevailing opinions I came across. So there's a lot of different threats to our elections, but this is kind of like the relative level of effort required, right? So when I'm doing security testing, I'm all gauging it to what's the relative level of effort? How resilient do you want to be? So sowing doubt and discord in the election integrity, pretty low bar to set. Most people, I think, would agree that we've had some issues in the area. Breach of lobbyist analytics and voter data. Anybody remember Cambridge Analytica? Okay, pretty low bar to set. Hacking political party email. Anybody hacked a single-factor email before? Pretty low bar to set. Changing votes by social engineering, that requires a little bit of money and effort, so that's a little bit higher bar. And then hacking the elections infrastructure, I would say, requires a little bit more effort, so that's a little bit of a higher bar in terms of effort. But that's what we're here to talk about today, so let's hack some election infrastructure. Here is a schematic from the Center for Internet Security Handbook on elections infrastructure. It's a schematic that gives you a very generalized diagram of some of the moving parts. So you have voter registration. You can register to vote by a special postcard form. You can go to the Board of Elections. You can have the BMV update your data for you. There's a lot of ways to do that. That data goes both to the local county as well as the state. And that data also gets pushed down to poll books. There's a whole workflow here. There's lots of workflow here that aren't represented, but there are workflows for like preparing ballots and absentee ballots, and it's kind of like you'll just be amazed if you dig into it how much work there is. But so poll books are the things when you go to the election and they check you off. Yeah, you're supposed to be here. Yeah, you're registered to vote. You can vote with a regular ballot instead of an absentee ballot or provisional ballot. Then they have these vote capture devices. We'll see later in the talk. It's a super high-end optical character recognition device, fancy scanner, right? Those votes get tabulated and they get submitted, and then election results get released. This piece is opinion, but here's just a couple of things that we may talk about today. So as far as voter registration goes, you got some privacy PII concerns. As far as voter registration, well, the ballot workflows aren't well indicated here. I actually was kind of surprised. I was down at the tabletop exercise in Columbus earlier this week. It's been a long week. And one of the counties actually told me they had thousands of absentee ballots get intercepted in the mail office, and they had to do a sting operation to find out what was going on. So I didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently that's an issue. With poll books, you got denial of service, voter suppression, right? In a lot of places that I've seen in Ohio, they have really good measures for you to still vote and your vote to count, but it's not that same way everywhere, especially not other places in the United States. Vote capture devices, what could possibly go wrong there? We'll talk about that some more. And then, if there's any kind of delay in the vote tabulation process, it kind of feeds into misinformation campaigns and sowing down discord. So the presentation of my talk today is I'm going to talk about some strengths you should be proud of as an American. I'm going to talk about some issues that you should feel at least a little bit upset about. And then I'm going to give you some things you can actually do about it. So let's see if we can get people in this room to do just one of these things, I'll be a happy camper. All right, let's talk about network security, right? Because we're hackers, and that's the first thing that comes to mind, right? When you're trying to breach an organization, breaching it remotely from over the internet. Let's lead into some strengths. So in this case, I'm going to give props to some people, right? So there was a new CIO that came in. They had a network background, and they had already started the ball rolling to secure funding for infrastructure upgrades, next-gen firewall, HIPS, that kind of stuff. There's a network admin who stepped up to plate to become a security engineer. He did that with taking on a lot more work and not any more pay, and he got the job done. So I got to give those guys, those folks, I should say, some recognition as a strength. So this is the whole reason why I think we should still work with counties like that instead of just throwing our hands up and going to GovCloud and Amazon, because they're the last Boy Scouts who are trying to do it right. Issues, it's actually pretty boring from a hacking perspective. Anybody who's a pen tester or red teamer, like, you can pretty much breach any small company organization with these techniques. It's pretty boring. For the rest of the people, I don't want to advertise to the rest of the world how to hack our counties. But pretty much if you've taken, so I want to be a pen tester training for TrustedSec offer at BSides 2 years ago, and they're doing a Black Hat this year, or if you follow Black Hills InfoSec, Tradecraft, pretty much any of that stuff works, right? So pretty much any small, medium organization is pretty much a soft target, right? So you do your OSINT to mine, enumerate your usernames. You spray against any sprayable service where you can get any kind of signal back to determine if it's a false or positive. You get on the VPN, you do privesc, you pivot, right? So unfortunately, that part's not that interesting, but what might be interesting to know is, like, the network segmentation at the county at that time was basically a napkin drawing, which was wrong. Big surprise, right? Nobody looks surprised in the audience. So you can pivot from there, right? What kinds of things can we pivot to in the county? The court system, jail, sheriff office leads as the Ohio law enforcement database, the election systems, financials, SCADA to control the water systems, health department, and so on. So, those expose records like sensitive legal info. Like, you could have cases thrown out, if the information is mishandled or disclosed improperly. Employee PII, we've never seen that unsecured before, right? Somebody laughed back there. Voter PII, which is significant, right? Because you can, a one-stop shop, you can mine 100,000 plus folks PII. Campaign bank account numbers for campaign finance reform. You get, all copies of all the checks. I mean, everything. Third-party passwords to other organizations, federal agencies, commercial, private agencies. Pretty much things you see in all your testing. Property drawings. Why would that be significant, right? So if you're a terrorist overseas and you want to mobilize some local asset, and you now have plans to a chemical plant, and you can tell them where to go put the bomb, it makes it easier for them, right? Also, health information is kind of important too, PHI. So now let's talk about some action. So you guys probably heard a lot of this before, so I'm sorry in advance if there's eye rolls. But basically, remove your shit from the internet, okay? Put your stuff behind always on VPN with multi-factor, or use Gabriel systems like Vertinex. If you don't have a SOC, get one now. Get an MSP. There's affordable ways to do that. If you're in the government, there's help from the feds in the state. Mitigate password spray vulnerabilities. So what are the things we do to do that? Can anybody give me an example of something you can do to, so is anybody familiar with a password spray attack? So basically the idea is, if you're rooting a password and trying the same user in multiple combinations of passwords, you'll eventually get a lockout and you'll be detected. However, if you try summer 2019 against everybody in your company, probably 2 or 3 people have that password. And it's not gonna raise any alarm unless you're doing some of the stuff that the last speaker was talking about and you have a pretty tight setup. So doing that, harden, disable your services and APIs, utilize WAFs to detect people trying to do these spray attacks. Use non-standard username conventions. So if you have employees have like a badge for work or an employee ID, like use part of that ID in the username instead of just doing first initial last name. It makes it a little bit harder for the attacker to enumerate their usernames. And then you should always have a full scope pen test, right? Because if you just focus on one little compliance area and it's totally easy to pivot like we saw at the county, you could just pivot into everything, it's a moot point. Do you guys buy that for $1? Okay. Let's talk about physical security. Is there anybody in the audience that's responsible for, for information security at their company for blue teamers? Any blue teamers in the audience? Couple? Okay. What would you do if your manager came to you on Monday and they said, by the way, we're going to be opening 100 remote offices in a couple of months. I need you to secure that, please. How would you feel? Would you be like hair on fire? Would you be like freaking out? I would if it was me. Yeah, freaking the hell out, somebody said. Exactly. Well, guess what? Like, that's what the elections does every election. Just a couple of the counties that I checked, they have 100 polling places. It's more or less a remote office they're securing, right? So props to them for doing that. This is just a Google pushpin map that shows you, there's a ton of polling places. If you want to know the legit place, go straight to the Secretary of State. But, you can imagine deploying like a remote site for a day, 100 remote sites for a day, doing that every couple of months. It's kind of amazing that they can do that. But on the other hand, there's some epic failures, right? So when they're not having an election, all this important stuff is usually at a central site. In this case, it was a county admin building, where I found out there are no guards at night. There is no security alarm. There are no cameras on the election systems. Has anybody climbed over a partition wall before using the drop ceiling? Yes. You guys know what I'm talking about. They're like, we got 2 locks in the door. Yeah, but I can climb over it, and I'm pretty out of shape right now, and I can still climb over it. Okay, so what's a big deal? We climb in. Big deal, what? Well, hey, guess what? There's all these voting machines parked here. And all their servers. So what could possibly go wrong? So I actually wasn't the first guy to notice, some of those things. But actually, let me take a step back. So let me talk about, what could you do with physical access to a voting machine, right? Voting machines have key locks sometimes. But if the key's stored with it, it's not going to help. We found default password hashes on there because they're not encrypted. It's just a compact flash. If you have a card reader in your bag, you can pop it in and look at the file system. And the election software, of course, is running a vulnerable version of Java. So, yes? Yes. So the gentleman audience was asking, what is a voting machine, if I could explain that a little better. So I'm glad they asked that, too, because it's a very generic term. In this particular case, I'm referring to the vote tabulation devices. They look like this garbage can type thing here. It's basically a high-end OCR scanner with some embedded systems running on it. And it basically speeds up the process of tabulating the votes, if that makes sense. Okay, but so I've seen this. This is here. This is in our backyard. But I'm not the first one to figure this out. In 2017, the Coherent Cyber Group did a red team for the California Secretary of State. They found all that stuff and a whole lot more, right? So one of the things they found is there are all kind of physical security measures like tamper locks and seals on the day of elections, and they found that they were pretty easy to bypass. They found that the locks are pretty easy to pick. Some of them are wafer locks and things like that. They were able to reverse the Java code, and they put in a new feature. So when you hit the poll closing button, it deletes all the votes as a proof of concept. So, yeah, I mean, basically it's totally pwned, right? So what I'm saying is, okay, if you have physical access and nobody is watching you and you have a whole night, you can do lots of bad things to the voting machines. If you're in a contentious state, and you can get access to even a couple of counties, you could make a difference in the elections. Here's some more physical security issues. So, has anybody remember when there's a big kerfuffle in the art community when Banksy had a painting and at the auction house all of a sudden started shredding the painting in the frame? Anybody remember that? Yeah. Well, man, if they can hide a small shredder that small in that frame, how hard would it be to put a shredder in these bad boys? And that would totally, time for a new election, right? Because the Board of Elections has tons of backups and backups and backups and backups procedures, but they all depend on paper. And if this thing is silently destroying your votes all day long with nobody noticing, and it deletes the votes when they hit tabulate, you got to have a new election. So I'm kind of concerned about that. So here's some things you can do about physical security at your county or your Board of Elections, right? If you know your county commissioners, or if you know how to contact them, reach out to them. Maybe email them. Every county is organized a little bit differently. Some people have different controls over different things. But let them know, like, hey, as a taxpayer, I kind of care about the physical security where my data is stored. Also ask the Board of Elections if they have signed up for their mandated Department of Homeland Security physical assessment, which is just mandated by this new Secretary of State Directive 2019-08. Because that will definitely bring some things to light. Also, if we have any engineers in the audience who are computer engineers with experience in trust point modules and stuff like that, you might want to reach out to this guy, Chris, who is the VP of System Security at ES&S that makes the election machines. They might need a little bit of help. I reached out to them and they didn't respond, but if anybody knows how to do disk encryption, that might be good. All right, well, next thing we're going to talk about is election workforce, okay? So if we're going to have an available election and have the integrity of the election, we need a workforce to do this work. Well, I think anybody who's like spent more than a few minutes at the Board of Elections will probably agree. Like, these folks have mad skills. They're crazy multitaskers. They're taking data from all kind of disparate sources. They're taking conflicting data and resolving it, from a lot of different sources. They're multitasking with everything from like back in the Stone Age typewriter to modern computers, and they're doing it amazingly well. They're very hardworking people, and I think those folks are the best line of defense that they have. I've also seen that the Board of Elections is driving security in some counties, in particular the county I was working with. So while I was there, it was actually the Board of Elections who, they don't have any internal computer people or security people, but they're driving lifecycle refresh. They're driving remediation, stronger passwords, next-gen firewalls. So I think the elections workforce deserves some kudos, and there's some things you should be proud about, that these are people who are doing it because they care, and they're doing a very good job. But of course, there's a lot of issues, right? So, there's not a lot of funding for them to have an internal security analyst in the Board of Elections. Some Board of Elections are one person. There's logistical and funding challenges to do background checks. So, in some boards of elections, there's a director and a deputy director, and that's it, and everybody else is a volunteer. Some that are appointed workers by political parties. The one I looked at had about 3/4 dozen permanent employees and maybe half a dozen part-time, and then all the poor workers were volunteers. They have no way to track, background checks for all those people right now. And, like I mentioned, the variety of technology. So how are you going to find a new hire college grad who knows how to use a typewriter, let alone a fax machine? Like, good luck. So what's going to happen when these people retire or they move on? How are we going to run the elections? That depends on paper. And there's no incentive for security training and pay raises. I think there should be pay raises. Like some of the DoD positions that require certain security certifications, I think there should be pay raises at the county for that. So here's some things that I'm hoping you all will do to help with this problem. One of them is read Senate Bill 327. This is an Ohio bill. This is a bill to create a cyber, okay, I said cyber, so anybody has got a drink should drink, but basically a cyber civilian reserve. So you've got the Navy Reserve, the Air Force Reserve. This would be a cyber civilian reserve, so that folks like you all who are talented and know how to do stuff aren't just volunteering when you can, and when you're busy you can't do anything. You actually get paid, and a lot of employers are used to dealing with active duty members of the military, or or part-time. So, you can keep your day job and you can help during an incident. So I think this would be something pretty awesome. But like anybody, you should read it yourself and make up your decision and let your legislators know about it. There is a Chief Information Security Officer opening at the Secretary of State in Ohio. Any hackers who have high emotional intelligence, please apply. Okay, we need somebody up there who knows what the hell they're doing, not some Yahoo who's just savvy. We also need someone who can deal with people and not just, the prototypical computer nerd. Another thing we can do is, there's a ton of people in this audience who are security consultants, or they work for AVAR, they work for different companies that offer security services. Reach out to the county boards in your area. Let them know what services are available. They may not know. A lot of these Board of Elections are non-technical, let alone, aware of information security. So reach out to them. Another thing is they're always looking for poll workers. Be a cyber-savvy poll worker. If somebody's like coming in and they're trying to hack the Bluetooth on the poll pads, it's going to be a lot easier to catch them if you have someone technical there than who are predominantly mans, which are retired folks. So I encourage you to volunteer for that. All right, let's talk about vendor risk. Has anybody ever dealt with any risk from vendors? Yes, a couple people. I believe strongly as a security consultant that if it's your data, it's your responsibility, you're in charge of your data, you need to hold your vendors accountable. We did find there were some strengths. So some vendors like ES&S, who make voting machines and many other components, and also No Ink, who make poll pads, iPad products, and things of that nature, they serve many states and sometimes multiple countries. They have certifications and accreditations. They have information security policies. ES&S even has a VP level person in charge of security, so they seems like they care about security. So I think those things are fantastic, and I hope more vendors will do that. But there's a lot of issues. Guess you probably can't see that tiny font back there, but some of the things we found is that, so there is some software that holds all your voter registration information. It has multi-factor authentication on it, but guess what? You can easily bypass it, just go directly to the database. The database is a flat file FoxPro database with no encryption. We saw privileged credentials stored in plain text and batch files on the desktop. While many vendors have certifications and accreditations for their products, I have never seen any record of a vendor undergoing a pen test for their own company. So obviously, if you can compromise the company, you can compromise the product. So that should be done. Some vendors I talk to have no formal security training, and everybody in their business has access to all your data. There's no bug bounty or responsible disclosure process with most of these vendors. There's a lack of competition in the market, so there's almost like a monopoly, single source in a lot of these areas. So if you compromise one organization, you could potentially affect an election. There's one company that runs the primary line of business software for most of the counties in Ohio, and that's owned by one family. So what could possibly go wrong? What happens if they're all on the same vacation and their plane gets taken out? Who's going to do operations? What happens if they capture or ransom somebody in their family and threaten to torture them? What's going to happen? I don't know. I hope that never happens, but we need more competition to make sure it doesn't. All right, so now some calls to actions that we need your help with, okay? If you see something, you can actually report it to the Secretary of State. So if the vendor, if you're doing a pen test or an engagement and you see some crazy whacked out vulnerability, and I actually have this graphic, although it's a cheesy stock graphic, I have it up there because, like I said, we found plain text passwords stored on the desktop. If you see something like that, the Secretary of State can collect that information and they can take action on it if the vendor's not being responsive. Just make sure you label it as a security record. It helps them CYA a little bit, so that it's maybe exempt from Freedom of Information Act or some of the other declassifications. So if you see something, let the Secretary of State know. Also, I'd really like to see more competition. I'd like to have more startups starting up election system software and vendor companies to provide more competition and innovation in the market. There's only more and more focus on security. So if you can out-innovate, you can pivot and just leave some of these other vendors in the dust that have kind of stuck doing things the way they've always been done. If you're any developers in the audience, maybe you should participate in some software foundations or nonprofits that can help drive frameworks and libraries that these commercial vendors who may not be experts in securities, but they can at least leverage the work of those foundations. I'll check out, election hacking villages at DEF CON and other places so you can kind of get a feel for it yourself. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is voter privacy. So while I wasn't explicitly asked to test voter privacy, as I was testing, I was freaked out about my own privacy, and you should be too. Many of us have worked with sectors that have compliance and they treat certain information carefully, right? Whether you have PHI and a high trust framework, or you're in a financial industry, or you have PCI or whatever, right? So there's certain data types you're just used to protecting by default, right? So one of the things I think is cool is that some vendors have a privacy policy, some election vendors. Another thing that's cool as far as your privacy goes is that in general, the elections does not track your vote to your identity. So they track the validity of the ballot, and that the ballot is valid. But the theory there is then the government doesn't know how you voted and you can't face retribution by who's ever in power. Although in the case of absentee ballots, that's a little bit of a gray area, right? Because if you request an absentee ballot, they have to create one and they have to track that ballot that they send to you. So that's a little bit of a gray area. But the issues, right? So remember I was talking before, and we're used to protecting all these kind of information types? Well, guess what? Your government publishes it for you. They don't have to breach them. They just give it away. So, yeah, so you should be aware of that, right? So in this slide, I'm picking on our Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, because he's a Green Beret and he can handle it. I don't recommend doxing people, but I'm just picked on him because it's his website, right? So on the Secretary of State website, you can look up people. You can find information about where they live, their full name, where they vote. If you look on the county page, you can find out even more information. You can find out the year of their birth, their political party affiliation. And can anybody tell me what kind of parameter this is? Is this a get parameter or a post parameter? Yes, sir. It's a get parameter. And guess what? They're not randomized. So it'd be like 2 seconds to write curl in a bash script to just scrape and pull down all the voter data in the county. Like, no-brainer. So, yeah, that's kind of not great for privacy. The other thing, as I was trying to allude to before, is from what I have seen, they are not treating your PII like you would expect in a regulated industry. Part of that comes from the sunshine laws that we're going to talk about in a little bit. There are some measures in place to have some of your information redacted if you're a victim of, human trafficking, domestic violence, and stuff like that. So if you or somebody you know is a victim of that, there's a program they can apply to have their information redacted. Now I want to talk about some things I would like us all to do to take action about this stuff. One, learn about the Ohio Sunshine Laws. There's online training. So you can go figure out what that's all about. I mean, overall, the theory is that if everything's out in the open, it's transparent and less likely to be for less room for corruption. But there are other implications of that as well. On the Attorney General's website, there's actually a form to ask for information to be redacted. So if you come across your PI published on the government site, you can actually ask to be redacted. But guess what? That redaction request is also a public record. So I don't know. Do we want to redact or do we not want to redact? That thing, a case-by-case basis there. For your privacy, vote at the BOE. Your data is direct. Your data is not being copied or sent or anywhere else. And in Ohio, we're privileged in that we can vote early. So it's really convenient. You don't have to take off on election day. You can go when your projects are light and you have time to go. If you care about privacy, let your government representatives know. All right, let's talk about one more area. Let's talk about voter PSYOPS, right? Remember back in the earliest slide I had, it was a little bit lower bar than the infrastructure bar to basically engineer votes. Oh, that's so nice. My wife's saying hi. I guess I should have disconnected that Wi-Fi before my talk. If you guys give a talk, make sure you disconnect your Wi-Fi before you do. I'm glad it wasn't something more spicy than that. All right. So, yes, that's true. I'm lucky to be loved. This piece is opinion, okay? But it's about elections, and it's something I have personal experience with. I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've done, and you can call bullshit on me or disagree with me if you want, but please let me know. So, some strengths. Our country has experience in PSYOPs. So just a quote here from the PSYOPS Guerrilla Warfare Manual, the human being must be considered the priority objective in a political war. So it's questionable, are we in a political war with our bipartisan politics or not? One experienced and intelligent individual made the comment to me that there's no intelligence behind what's going on right now in politics, whereas in a military operation, obviously there's a lot of intel. So this may be abusing that terminology a little bit, but you make your own judgment. Another strength is that most of the top social media companies are owned by American corporations. So theoretically, we can use American laws to protect our citizens. What are some potential issues? Okay, well, a lot of us heard about the Internet Research Agency or a Russian troll farm, propaganda farm, right? The House Intelligence Committee has a bunch of information on their website if you want to go to that source or whatever source you trust. Or the Department of Justice has a Mueller report that talks about it as well. So you have troll farms that are, messing with voters, right? We know about that. Okay, Microsoft had a bot that got targeted by trolls and started spewing out racist junk, right? You've got researchers at Yale and other places that show how bots can disrupt and change the way humans collaborate. So what could possibly go wrong here? So you could have like a troll farm and an amplification attack with bots, and it could just totally mess with the voters, right? You can now buy votes for persuasion as a service online. So there's some folks who took some innovations from Cambridge Analytica, and they have really great graphics artists, press rooms, marketers, social media folks, and they will create platforms that look a lot like the platforms you trust to get your news from. They'll juxtapose legit articles next to op-ed articles. They'll target that with targeted social media campaigns. And according to some sources, they were actually able to sway the recent Virginia elections by as much as 7 percentage points, which was a pretty close gap in the election. So this stuff is only going to get more real, right? So a lot of us are information security professionals. We might think like, hey, we're really smart, self-aware people. We're not going to be a victim to this, right? But even if 1 in 6 of us fall victim, that's enough to sway the elections. So I wanted to make a couple of suggestions, and you feel free to disagree. First suggestion is ditch your smartphone, okay? Back when the Securus breach came out, this is a screenshot from Krebs's site. Back when the Securus breach came out and I found out that all the phone companies were selling all their location data without our permission all the time, I was like, all right, I'm done. I got rid of my smartphone. I haven't had a smartphone for a year and a half, okay? And I'm employed in the tech industry, and it can work. And I have started to learn how to find driving directions on my own. Started regrowing parts of my brain that are atrophying, and my stress level's gone down a little bit. I don't get a lot of those interruptions that I used to get, and my family members have learned how to adjust to like pre-2000s life when not everybody had a cell phone everywhere. So if you have to have a cell phone for your work, maybe ditch it and get a feature phone. I've got a couple of Motorola Razrs I repaired in my lab. If you want one, just hit me up. The other thing is social media. So social media has, explicit purposes. If you're on LinkedIn, you're trying to find a job or find employees, like get on and get off, A lot of people are complaining how LinkedIn is becoming like a Facebook with all kinds of garbage on there. If you're doing social engineering, you probably have your fake profiles for social engineering, like we all do, and you get on and you find information and get off. Like, don't read the articles, just find out what you're there to get. So what I'm pointing out to you is to get on and GTFO the social media. Make sense? Okay. Does anybody have questions? Okay, yes, please.
What do you think about open source systems?
The question was, what do we think about open source voter systems? Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think probably folks in this audience have a lot of good thoughts about that as well. So, one of the merits of open source is that it can potentially be reviewed, but there have also been studies where they found very vulnerable binaries or very vulnerable code was simply copied and assumed it had been reviewed and introduced vulnerabilities in a lot of places. I think some level of transparency is good. I think that there is a digital answer out there that will be better than what we have now, but I think that just blindly moving to digital without any kind of backup is bad, without vetting it and thinking carefully about it. Does that answer the question? Yes, sir.
So what's the most stringent standards for the vendor
The gentleman was, if I understood correctly, was asking what are the most stringent standards for the vendor machines. And right now, based on the data I'm seeing, California gets the cake for being the most stringent. Maybe it's because they have such a huge economy or so many tech companies there, but they do way more testing than any other states I've seen. And like some of the findings I shared with you were already found by a red team that had done that work in California. So they're kind of leading the way. There are certifications and accreditations, but I don't think there is not a regulatory standard right now that I'm aware of. I think it's good to go with a company that has somebody who's responsible for security and that they have security policies, so they at least have a program. Does that answer the question? No? Okay. And any other questions? Yes, sir.
Real quick, have you asked the county about bug bounties? Have you talked to them about that? Like, where have your discussions gone?
Yeah, so the gentleman was asking, what's up with bug bounties? Have you asked the county about it? So, except for one county which has a very progressive and advanced force, who I just happen to know through our security community, I don't think any of the others would even know what that is, and they have no money to pay. Although there's been some ideas floated around that maybe there could be something to that. Right now, I think our best effort is to let the Secretary of State know, because a lot of the vendors have no bug bounties, or maybe if you're going to do it, sell it to a responsible bug bounty program that will responsibly disclose it.
Any entities were floated up? Any entities that Florida is going to get floated up?
The gentleman was asking me regarding what's happening with the state of Florida's elections, and unfortunately I don't have any good information on that right now, so I don't want to mislead you. The gentleman was asking about how Cuyahoga County looked, and the county I tested was not Cuyahoga County, so I have no direct verifiable knowledge, but there is a gentleman in our information security community here who works there, at least one, and I haven't tested or seen anything myself, but it sounds like they have it together pretty well, and I would encourage you to reach out to them. Excellent. Yeah, I would recommend to reach out to them, introduce yourself, and yes, sir.
Are you allowed to say what county you work with?
I did not get prior approval from them to say which one I was testing. You can figure it out with a little OSINT, but from what I understood is it was not the biggest nor the smallest county, but I imagine it's relatively indicative of others based on my interactions with other counties at the Secretary of State's tabletop exercise. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there like a community effort, like during the voting period, not just voting day, but for all these people with expertise in security to do like more of a community type of effort to be on the lookout for the hunt?
So the question was, are there any community efforts for threat hunting or otherwise participating to help secure the elections? And I think that there's a lot of really good work going on right now. So there's the hacking village at DEF CON. Some of the elections folks have said, well, it's not truly realistic or whatever. But overall, I think that's generated a lot of activity. And now there is more attention from the feds trickling down to the state, trickling down to the counties than ever before. More coordination, more help going on. So there's a lot of good movement going on. As far as what our community can do, I'm going to try to run through those really quick again. So if you aren't like a very strong, self-aware person, and you don't know for sure you're not vulnerability to PSYOPS, get your smartphone, get off social media. Let your government know if you care about privacy. Vote at the BOE if you can. Be aware of the sunshine laws and that your information is being published. If you can, if you're a startup or you're in a position to start a tech company, start a company and make some voter registration software. If you're a software developer, participate in projects that can help secure voting software. If you see something, let the Secretary of State know through appropriate channels. Be aware that just reach out and let people know. So that's a great community effort, right? So there's probably a lot of companies in this area that compete, but if you should still reach out and let the boards know that you're around and what you can do to help them, because they may not even know. We need somebody to apply for the CISO job at the Secretary of State. They have a CIO. He's a great, very savvy person, but we need somebody who's responsible for security explicitly. Take a look at the Senate bill for a cyber civilian reserve. This could potentially be a very good thing. I need some people who are smarter than me and have more legal background to read it, but check it out. If you deal with the county at all, or you know anybody, let them know that you care about physical security. If you know about hardware encryption, contact ES&S to let them know, ask them if they need some help. If you operate a network yourself, do some of these things, get your stuff off the internet. If you don't have ability to detect people. So I had a client recently, I was on an engagement, and they were just super vigilant. Like, I love working with clients like that. And they caught me, and I had got some valid creds, and I was on their VPN, and I was checking some things, and I was trying not to be too noisy, but they caught me and they booted me. But I just waited until they went to bed and they got back on, because they didn't have a full SOC, they didn't have a full team, and they'd already been working 70 hours that week, and they were overworked and overstressed. So if you don't have like a bench of people to run a SOC, like, get one as a service, so that somebody can respond to these things and keep me out of your network at night when you're sleeping. Any other questions? Okay, well, I really appreciate your time today. I hope that I gave you something that was useful, and I'd love to hear from you.